Okay, welcome everyone. Today's topic is why artificial intelligence is not a job destroyer, and we will explore AI and worker collaboration and look at some of the real world settings of how AI is actually augmenting rather than destroying our work. And I guess contrary to popular belief, AI is not primarily a job destroyer. I've said this so many times. It's about changing how we work and augmenting all of our jobs. And to help me discuss and untangle this topic, I'm super pleased to say I've got Tom Davenport and Steve Miller with me today, who have just published a new book called Working with AI: Real Stories of Human Machine Collaboration. So anyone who doesn't know Tom or Steve, Tom is a distinguished professor of information technology and management at Babson College. He is also a visiting professor at Oxford Said Business School and the author of many books in this field, including The AI Advantage and Only Humans Need Apply. And Stephen is a professor emeritus of information systems at Singapore Management University and the co-author of Robotics, Applications and Social Implications. Welcome, Tom and Stephen.
Great to be here. Thanks, Bernard.
It's so nice to have you with us. Where are you joining us from, Tom?
I'm in Santa Barbara, California.
Beautiful. How about you, Stephen?
I'm in Singapore.
Very good. So we are properly spanning the world today as I'm joining from London.
You're in the middle, right?
Exactly. I'm somewhere in between. So, Tom, I think the book initially was your idea, and thank you so much for sharing this with me. I've had the pleasure of reading it. Why did you want to write this book?
Well, as you said a minute ago, I had co-authored a book called Only Humans Need Apply, which was about the general idea of augmentation. And I, like you, I was convinced that AI was not a job killer generally, that it was changing our jobs but not getting rid of them. And so it seemed logical to collect some examples of how AI was helping people do their jobs and vice versa. And so Steve and I connected about something else, and it turns out we were both interested in this topic and thought it would be great to gather some examples from Asia as well as North America and Europe and so on. So we launched our collaboration.
Very good. So this is exciting. So maybe we can look at some of your favorite examples, or maybe some of the more innovative, interesting examples that you feature in your book that illustrate this new way of working and how AI is transforming our work and how we collaborate with machines. Stephen, do you want to kick this off?
Tom, you go first. I sort of have a plan for how I'll do this, and I'll follow Tom.
Very good.
One of my favorites is the one that I've written about on several occasions over several years, and it takes place at Morgan Stanley's wealth management business unit. And it's I've always been interested in wealth management because I'm also interested in managing my own wealth and what computers can do. I've always been a little bit distrustful of unaided humans in that regard. So Morgan Stanley, the vice chairman, had an idea over a decade ago that they could use computers in wealth management in sort of the same way that Netflix uses them in entertainment, that they would make recommendations for particular investments. And this turned out to be a really tough thing to do. Several firms tried on behalf of Morgan Stanley. It didn't work. Finally, they started using a machine learning approach. They had some good ideas for how you would identify investments. These are all mediated by human financial advisors. On average, they have 200 customers each, which means, they have to be pretty productive or the customers aren't going to hear from them very often. And it used to take about 45 minutes for them to come up with a customized investing idea. The machine learning system, which they call the next best action system, brought it down to less than a minute. And they've measured over the years how this works. It turns out that people who use this system, they've been pretty voluntary in introducing it. People who use this system have much more satisfied clients, and they're obviously much more productive, and they grow assets under management faster than the ones who don't. So I just think it's a great example of humans and machines working together to try to do something a little less expensively than it would have been done in the past. I mean, if you wanted to pay somebody to come up with customized investment ideas for you, Morgan Stanley's not cheap, but it would have been a lot more expensive than what they do to make that happen. It's also really interesting in that it turns out it's not just the investment ideas, it is the frequent contact that the clients really like. They want to feel like somebody is looking out for them in terms of how they manage their money. They want to talk about life events. One of my favorite stories at Morgan Stanley was Jeff McMillan, the chief data and analytics officer who led the development of the system, asked the financial advisors, okay, you've seen a version of this. What would you like most to add? And they said, we would like information about how the local sports teams are performing so we can discuss that with our clients. So it's that relationship that really matters. And so they've done, I think, a quite good job of combining the relationship component of wealth management and the ideational component, if you will.
Very good. Yeah, super interesting. Stephen, what's your favorite example?
I'm going to give you some others, but that Tom had those contacts and he did that interview and wrote that case. One thing I found fascinating about the case Tom just described was, as he was saying, there was like other kinds of social, relational, and supporting information that would go in the message that would go out. And, obviously they could more productively get out those messages. In the case, there's a statement where one of the Morgan Stanley people is quoted as saying, and when they call, they usually talk to me about something different than was actually what was in the message. The message prompted them, but then by the way, I sort of had a backlog of things I wanted to talk to you about. And it's such a beautiful example of the way the machine can help and the productivity and sort of get the content out there. And yet there's other dimensions to it.
Absolutely.
All right. I'm going to very briefly, rather than go into depth about one case, I'm going to talk about three different kinds of cases. All right. So one is, it was an interview where Tom was the lead about a machine shop where they used the Microsoft HoloLens with a software application using augmented reality to help with instructions on how to use a machine. And both the operators could use it as well as the engineers. And as we emphasize in one of our learning points, it's such a wonderful example of new technology that actually makes it easier for new entrants to come into the job. Where there are examples where technology can and sometimes diminish the opportunities for new entrants. So that one really stood out. In the case about the physical security company Certus that was monitoring Jewel, this amazing mall in Singapore, it was a combined thing of using AI systems to help with the monitoring and evaluation, and also digitalization of a lot of work tools. And some of the guest concierge and security guards, they're not spring chickens. They're older in age. And it is an adjustment to learn how to do this. And it took extra time. But because of the AI-enabled together with the digitalization tools, they save so much time that the supervisors could reinvest it to help pull these older people along to make the transition. And the digitization made specific things like writing an incident report so much easier that it made it easier for some of these people who maybe their language wasn't great or they're getting into their earlier middle 60s to extend their career runway because certain aspects of the job were simplified. So those are two of my favorite. And I'll just very briefly give one other. In Salesforce, we talked about the person who led a team that was helping the company with ethical AI practices. And without going into details on what that person did, what a wonderful example of an entirely new type of job category. So, Bernard, are there places where automation, including AI automation, is used and it erodes employment in an occupation? Of course, there's that. But then we see these other kind of examples as well.
Absolutely. So I'm particularly interested in some of the common themes that have come out of your analysis. There's so many interesting case studies spanning so many different industries. Maybe we can look at some of the themes, especially maybe starting with the impact on the workforce, on the work of the future, and skills in particular. One of the things that you bring out is that you say everyone will be a techie in the future, and that we need to be prepared to work alongside AIs. What does that mean in practice, Tom?
Well, when we talk to these people who are, for the most part, I think, early adopters of new technology, we would ask them, how did you get into this role? Why did working with AI in this way really appeal to you? And they said, I've always been interested in working with technology, and I always tried out new things. And so we concluded, I think, that was going to become one of the primary hallmarks of new approaches to work, that people would have to embrace digital and intelligent technologies if they were going to be successful in their jobs. One of my favorite lines, we didn't put anything about it in the book, but I'd done a little piece with a radiologist in the Boston area who also turns out has a PhD in AI. And he kept saying, the only radiologists who are going to lose their jobs to AI are those who refuse to work with AI. And frankly, I'm not even sure that the radiologists who refuse to work with AI are going to lose their jobs anytime soon either, since there's a big shortage of radiologists. But in general, I think everybody needs to learn how to work with these new technologies. And some of the companies that are trying to anticipate some of the impacts on the workforce, it's hard to think in advance about how AI is going to change jobs. So in many cases, what they're doing is just training people on digital skills. That's what Amazon has done, and it's multi-hundreds of millions program to retrain warehouse workers. They teach them, programming and digital logic and so on, so they can adapt to whatever comes along. And I think it's unfortunate that that's the only thing we're confident about teaching, but it's not a bad idea if you had to choose one.
Yeah, and for me, radiologist is such a good example, because what we're seeing here in the UK is there's, and I guess in the US as well, this big shortage of radiologists. And part of the course of this is that we've had 10 years of rhetoric where companies like Siemens and GE were saying, actually, we can now build CT scanners and X-ray machines that can do a diagnosis better than a doctor or a radiologist will be able to do in the future. So they thought, okay, maybe this is not a career path for the long run. What we're now seeing is that it still is. So if you look at the role of a radiologist then in the future, what would you see as the core tasks for them? Because AI will be able to take over some of the diagnostics and some of the things that that they would have done in the past. So how will that job change?
Yeah, good question. And by the way, it wasn't just the vendors who were proclaiming this. Jeffrey Hinton, who clearly a very smart guy, sort of revitalized the whole field of neural networks, said 4 or 5 years ago, well, in 4 or 5 years, I don't think anybody's going to need a radiologist because machines are going to do all this work. First of all, radiologists do a lot of different things in addition to just reading scans. That's one of the things that they do, and that's the only one that is, on the cusp of being automated to a substantial degree. A, it's not yet fully. B, there's still the need for a second set of eyes, even on reading scans. C, most of these proclamations that AI is as good or better than human radiologists come out of research labs. And it turns out in the world of practice, you have a lot of different types of machinery that get used. And these deep learning systems that recognize images can be swayed by only a few pixels being changed. And so radiologists need to understand that different machines are going to produce different results, whether they or an AI system looks at it. So there are all these other things that they do about, working with other physicians. And although they don't necessarily see patients, they do talk to patients pretty frequently. So there are all those things, and there are the checks that need to be made on the images themselves. And so I think if my son or daughter wanted to be a radiologist, I would say, go ahead. I think you'll be fine, but learn how AI works and work alongside it.
Very true. And this is probably true for most jobs. Stephen, anything to add on how it might change the skills in the future?
In a systematic way, build on two themes that Tom set up, where you use the example, it's going to be the radiologist who is augmented with AI-enabled tools and effectively working with them. That will be the bigger threat to other radiologists. People have made that observation in a lot of areas. Take managerial work. Because of the variety of most kinds of managerial work, especially more senior, it's not amenable in the whole to automation, which works better in highly standardized environments. But managers who effectively work with augmentation are going to be more effective than those who don't. So the competition is going to come by people augmented with tools. So that's point one. Point two is, Tom coined the term for that chapter, everyone's a techie, but it's important that people understand that in the right way. That does not mean that everyone has to go out and literally learn the math of what it takes to do different types of learning models or to build the underlying machine learning DevOps platforms, all right? Of course, we need people for that. That will be a specialist set, obviously growing jobs. We need people who are the domain experts. And we need people who can interface their domain with the outside world, which is constantly changing. And by everyone's a techie, it's just restating Tom's point that having these people appreciate how to use the tools. And one other related point to that was, of course, people get sent to training, and there's the role for structured training in its various forms. We observed a lot of on-the-job learning. It's not to say structured training isn't the role, but most learning occurs through work-embedded learning. And the more that companies can give even a little bit of scaffolding to give opportunities for people to learn about working with and applying the technology with, feedback, support, sharing sessions, most of that's going to be more effective than classical training sessions, and it will certainly be more relevant. So I'll just leave it at that.
Can I just say one more thing about this and the role of technology that Steve brought up, Bernard, I know you're quite familiar with the whole automated machine learning movement. And so we had one case about the use of that at a very sophisticated organization, used to be dunnhumby, USA, now has the interesting name of 84.51 degrees, which is the longitude of Cincinnati, Ohio, where they're based. This is the sort of in-house data subsidiary of Kroger, the largest grocery retailer in the US. And they have had a concerted effort to introduce automated machine learning capabilities. Who would think that the job of data scientists itself would be automated or partially automated, but it in fact is. Some data scientists do not embrace these new technologies and feel like, no machine could do as well as I do. But at Kroger, they've done quite well at embracing it. But they've also empowered a new group of people that they call insight specialists who, as Steve says, understand the business and the customers, have the domain knowledge, can now, with AutoML, create some quite sophisticated machine learning models. And in fact, in some of the training competitions that they have, because they understand the domain better than the data scientists, they often create more effective models than the data scientists do. So we describe that process, and I think it's really fascinating. It's happening even in data science.
And Tom's point, they might not create more sophisticated models, but they know what's important and sort of get the result that's needed. And, there's a lot of grunt work in doing data science, just like there's a lot of grunt work in doing everything. And relatively few problems require the bleeding edge, the brand newest, like it just came out of the research lab 6 months ago. Very few problems require that for the early iterations of what they need to do to demonstrate proof of value and to get everything else aligned that needs to be aligned to make the whole pipeline work. So as Tom pointed out in that story, bringing some structure and process and workflow automation has tremendously improved the productivity of the data scientists, where they can do some very special projects. Maybe the model they need to build isn't yet in the library, but those are special one-offs, right? And they get to do coaching. So they're able to amplify the data science delivery power, not only through their coaching, but through what Tom described as the citizen data scientists who have sophisticated domain understanding and then build simple models. And for much of what you need to do, that's just where you need to be.
100%. I couldn't agree more. When we look at skills and the sharing of work between AIs and humans, where would you say is the sweet spot where AI is really good, and where are the areas that we can't yet automate, where machines can't perform them yet? So sweet spot, and where can't machines go yet? Tom
first, please.
I think it's taking that first cut, whether it's looking at a radiology image or recommending an investment, or we did a case study about fundraising. It's composing an email to a potential philanthropic donor. That first cut, AI is almost always going to do a pretty good job, if it's a well executed use case. But one of the areas that we found that AI just can't compete with humans yet is that contextual understanding. So one of my favorite examples is at Stitch Fix, where, of course, AI helps create styling recommendations for customers, but they also have human stylists, and the human stylists, when you talk to them about what do they do that the AI system can't really do, the customer sends in notes sometimes about the context about their need for new clothing. They do men's clothing now, but I think the bulk are still women's. And they'll send in messages saying, I'm going to a wedding where my ex is going to be present, and I need to look particularly stunning to make him jealous or whatever. And computers just don't get that yet, and humans understand it quite readily, so they can pick out some particularly alluring dress for this woman to wear. And we found a number of cases where that human ability to understand the broader context meant that, the first cut is a good approximation to solving the problem, but you really need that human to pull it all together and revise it, review it, in some cases override it.
And
Very good.
Bernard, I think it's useful to come back to this issue of augmentation and automation. And it's taken me a while to realize it's not versus. These two phenomena coexist, and we need them. Automation, in the classical sense of task displacement, is very powerful for well understood situations. They might have some variability, but the nature of the variability isn't giant, and it's well understood. It's consistency and efficiency. All right. And AI, in any types of tooling, even pre-AI, but especially turbocharged with AI, has a big role to play in enhancing the ability to do automation. There's this unfortunate reality that the world keeps changing. And even with AI enablement, processes that are highly automated, let's acknowledge that AI enablement makes an automated process a little bit more adaptable, but it still has its limits to adaptability. There's this other part of the world where you need to experiment. You need to explore. Something's changed. The thing that you're trying to assess today is not the same thing that is filling up my database from last month and last year. So, you need these people to deal with change situations, whether it's change in the nature of variance in a production workflow, or there's just something like every supply chain in the world just changed. You know what I mean? So it's not automation versus augmentation. We need the automation, or we don't get productivity with existing work. But if that's all we keep in mind, we won't create the new work. And new work is highly associated with the use of augmentation. So, when people hear about the AI, they so often immediately revert to the automation scenario. And not only as a sort of like a citizen and general public awareness, but also in the workplace. The first instincts are, well, let's automate what people are currently doing. Whereas the way we're going to create new jobs, new services, which, by the way, are almost always labor intensive and result in new opportunity, is by using augmentation to support experimentation and exploration. So all of these things sort of happen in parallel.
Very good. In one of your chapters, the headline is "What Machines Can't Do Yet," and "yet" is in brackets, which I'm interested that whenever I talk about the future of AI, I'm still astonished by how fast certain things are developing, especially when we look at creative AI, generative AI, and some of the possibilities there. the other point you make in the book is if we ever reached the singularity, the point where machines are as capable as humans, if not more, that then all the tips are basically out of the window. I'm interested to hear your views on. Do you believe we will get to that stage where AI will be as capable or even more capable as humans? And when, if so, when do you think that will be, Tom?
Well, it's above my technical pay grade to do a great job of prognosticating about when and if the singularity will come. But maybe both of you, I think, have seen this book by Martin Ford, where he interviews a number of really smart AI experts and asks them when and if that will happen. And the average is quite high. There are only a few people who think that it's coming anytime soon. The average is going to be long after all of us are dead, unless there is some miraculous extension of life expectancy. So I am not worried about it, and I think even when it exists, we humans are creative enough to find some other interesting things that we can do. I mean, I've been interested over the last several weeks in some of these large transformer models that people are using, GPT-3 and DALL-E 2 and so on. I've been playing around with them, doing a little bit of research on their business implications. And DALL-E 2, for example, I've replaced it. I've used it to replace Google Image as my collector of images to put on slides for presentations, because last night I was trying to do one for my class later today, and I needed a sort of an image for all the good things that AI does. So I said, give me a robot angel. And in a few seconds, of course, it comes up with a robot angel. But if I were only better at prompting, I think it would have been a much better image. So this idea of creating a prompt for digital image creation, AI-based image creation, is not something that we ever thought of that anybody would need to do. Yet there's an 82-page book on DALL-E 2 prompts now that someone has written, a human has written. So I think there are always going to be new things that we can come up with for humans to do, even when the machines are better than us at most activities.
Very good. Stephen?
Let me comment that there's two different clock speeds simultaneously running in the world, and it causes cognitive dissonance with a lot of people. The rate at which new AI methods, models, algorithms, demonstrations come out is very fast. And by any measure, the progress in the last few years, the last 10 years, and then take each of the individual years, it's been very fast. And as Tom said, recently, since 2017, we've had the transformer revolution and sort of everything that's come from that, which is a lot, okay? Yet, the rate at which organizations assimilate change is very slow. Now, it's not to say there aren't some special exceptions. You can get a cloud-based interface. Boom, Tom can just use DALL-E 2. He doesn't need to, reconfigure all of his technology infrastructure at home. But if you've got a complicated work process and you got to link finance and HR and operations and external and internal stuff, that doesn't happen so fast. So I would not make any bet about AI can't do this, that, or the other, because if you sort of constrain the situation and keep a clean environment, if in a certain sense, somebody will come up with some demonstration. But the ability to use it in the wild, and let me go back to Tom's example with the radiologist. Different machines have slight differences. You know what I mean? Even the lighting is slight different, and all these small things. It's just variation that humans naturally know how to deal with, right? So the rate at which AI capabilities move versus the rate at which society changes are different things. Now, some places you see fast adoption, but there's this huge adoption following, you know, as we all know, the famous S-curve thing. So I'm going to reconceptualize the singularity. I don't think it's relevant, actually. I don't think it's going to happen. And the other point is, why on earth do we limit ourselves to saying the best robots can be is, you know, like humans? Already they're super tools. They can do a wide range of things that we can't even begin to do. They can see in the whole electromagnetic spectrum. You know what I mean? So yes, we should be building super tools across the spectrum. All right. Now, this is something you and maybe your audience listeners will remember. We have seen the Star Wars movies. Now, it doesn't matter what episode. People like me and Tom, we remember the very original Star Wars movies that came out, right? Versus The Matrix. Why do I mention these? The Star Wars movies had a multiplicity of different types of robots. There was no all-encompassing one intelligence. There was the equivalent of the Cambrian explosion of life that happened 500 million years ago. For any kind of thing, there was a specialized type of robot. And the sources of good and evil, even with all these remarkable machines, was still from the biological mechanisms. The Matrix is the other model. This all-encompassing intelligence comes. My belief, unprovable, is that the future is going to play out in the Star Wars scenario and not the Matrix scenario. I don't mean the details of the plot line, but the notion of we're going to have this vast evolution of all kinds of machine intelligences, most of which obviously are superior to people, or they wouldn't be tools. But, you know, there's not going to be this one all-encompassing intelligence. So that's why I sort of think the singularity concept is noise.
Very good. One of the other pieces of advice you draw out in the book is that you need that platforms have a role to play, and you need platforms to enable the augmentation of jobs. Do you want to explain this in a bit more detail, Tom?
Sure. There's a lot of attention that goes to AI, and we think it's largely deserved, but in almost every case, it has to be augmented by other capabilities. Steve did some interviews. I think I participated in some, but not all of them, at DBS Bank in Singapore. And they, I think, furnished a great example about transaction surveillance and anti-money laundering, where they augmented an existing system. If you're familiar with anti-money laundering, you know probably the great majority of organizations have used rule-based systems for that in the past, and they work, but they generally create too many false positives. So DBS, as a number of banks are doing, created a machine learning system to prioritize. By the way, that's one of the other things that AI systems do well. They prioritize cases, helps the human beings a lot. In the case of any money laundering, you assign a priority to a case, and at DBS, if it has a high priority, you put the humans on investigating it right away. If it has a low priority, they put it in the ice box, the cooler, and say, let's watch it for 6 months and see if anything bad happens. So that saves them a lot of work. But the important thing is, at the same time they built this machine learning system, They also built a new workflow system that kind of, moves the work along. They built a new data platform where all or much more of the bank's data could be used to determine whether they should pursue any money laundering case or not. And they also built a kind of a network analysis system, a sort of graph-based thing where, it turns out fraud happens in fraud rings in many cases. So knowing the relationships among potential fraudsters is often a very helpful thing to do. So in almost every case, we found out there was some supporting technology that supplied data or did the workflow or analyzed the network or all sorts of other possibilities along with the AI. And even I mentioned that the Morgan Stanley system before, they developed this communication system to send out the messages and manage the whole process of communications with clients. And they said that's just as valuable as the AI recommendations.
Let me just pick up on what Tom said. I won't say zero, but relatively few AI systems can work without conventional IT. And I won't say in 100%, but in most corporate deployments, it's actually a misnomer to call it an AI system. At the heart of these systems are methods using what we call the AI family of algorithms that might be key to making a prediction, a recommendation, an optimization, a prioritization, things like that, right? Image analysis, text. But it's like thinking of a chatbot. A chatbot isn't just a chatbot. All kinds of things have to happen on the middle and back end. And Tom gave the example on the DBS transaction surveillance. You have to be pulling data from 60 systems. So in addition to the 29, Tom's always constantly interviewing other people. I just finished this write-up of large-scale nationwide deployment of AI-enabled systems in Singapore's public health system. But the actual AI part of it is actually only a small part. It's obviously critical. Without it, the whole thing wouldn't work. But if it were only the AI system, the application wouldn't work. This gets back to it takes a village to change a job with AI, because you need a lot of job roles across all these different parts that have to be brought into alignment and coordination. And it's also why these systems, especially if they have deep capacity for improving productive capacity, right? They really can make a big difference. They don't materialize overnight. They take a long time, right? Even if you can do the model proof of value demonstration fast, the organizational integration is slow and steady. Dare me to say, old-fashioned work.
Even when we have the Singularity, it's going to take a decade to integrate it into our existing systems, right, Steve?
That's right. The coming back to this Singularity point, there are tensions. There is the potential to erode deployment in ways beyond what has ever been done. That can't be denied. There's the potential to use this capability to address problems beyond, and humanity needs a lot of help in a lot of problem areas. If we don't get some help, we're in some big things with climate, and just across the board, A to Z. So that's the tension in a way. How to use the new capabilities to address both new problems and new opportunities, or existing problems and new opportunities. And there will be tremendous increases in productive capacity, but only if only a handful of people benefit from that. You're going to have a lot of angry people who are probably still employed, but in a marginal way. So there'll obviously be a bunch of people who will benefit tremendously from these changes. They'll be well-paid, great professions, right? And we've been seeing that even before AI is entering on the radar screen of what's going on across the economy. And the big issue is how to have the rest of the workforce, the people in the middle tier jobs, the lower tier jobs, where they're not excluded from these benefits. And interestingly enough, that's not a property of the technology. That's a property of how humans choose not to predict this future, Bernard, but to create this future.
Very good points. Stephen, you just touched on the phrase that it takes a village to create new jobs, and this is one of the themes that you draw out. So maybe, Tom, you can expand a little bit on this and explain what you mean by it takes lots of job roles and different people to change the work of the future.
Well, yeah, we sort of stumbled upon this, Bernard. We wanted primarily to interview people who were kind of at the front lines doing the work day to day that was supported or enabled by AI. But in almost every company we would talk to, they would say, well, yeah, happy to put you in touch with this person who's, good example of frontline work. But you might want to talk to the IT person who led the development of the project, or you might want to talk to that frontline worker's boss who was the initiator of the whole activity. And there were some vendors involved here, and they can probably shed some light on how this system relates to other systems that they put in. In some cases, we found out about this system from the vendors themselves, and so they wanted to talk with us. So in almost every case, we ended up having to talk to, or getting to talk to, I should say, 4 or 5 different people. And there were a lot we didn't talk to who were involved in the use of these systems. As Steve said, it's a complex organizational effort to pull one of these things off, even involving, a single job, a single task that is being augmented with AI. And so I think that's one of the things that makes it time consuming and expensive to do this. And one of the reasons why the clock speed for actual organizational implementation is a lot slower than what happens in the research lab.
Very good.
Just to make a quick comment, just building exactly on what Tom so nicely described. Yes, there are tools like AutoML that are improving the productivity of certain aspects of the model building. And some of those tools are sort of getting woven into the infrastructure. But, there's business concept change, business model change, business practice change, interaction change, both within the company and with external. And sort of the delightfully humorous irony is creating AI systems is very labor intensive. Now, I'm including the asterisk to say, yes, we're getting more productive at that. And for companies that have been doing this for a decade and have an infrastructure, they have a learning curve and they get a lot more productive. But every time you sort of move into something that's not familiar, which happens all the time in the world of business, as we know, it's very labor intensive. This is why the key to dealing with the employment issue is creating new work. Because if all of the effort is on productivity improvement and driving efficiency in existing work, yes, we'll definitely drive down the employment there, right? So plus we'll have limited opportunities, So this is where this augmentation, automation, I'm beginning to see it as a yin yang, that it's one of these things that are constantly in juxtaposition to one another.
Good. Very. If you now look at your hopes and predictions for the future, if you look at the whole space of AI and automation and the future of work, what are your hopes and predictions for the future, Tom?
Well, my primary hope is that people in organizations start to take a broader look at this issue. We didn't find too many examples of kind of thoughtful strategy about where this was all going to go and what kinds of skills and capabilities were needed by the organization in the future and how to start developing them. We found, as Steve said, a lot of people learning on the job how to do the work. These were sort of one-off kinds of examples, but we need better than that. We need CEOs and heads of operations and heads of human resources. They really have not gotten engaged enough yet in this to think about what work needs to be by digital workers, what needs to be by human workers, how the two are going to relate. Do the digital workers manage the humans? Do the humans manage the digital workers? And in what cases? And we just didn't find many cases of that kind of forward-looking planning and thinking. And we need it. And AI isn't going to do it, so the humans are going to have to step up.
Very good. How about you, Stephen?
Bernard, we here's one where history is relevant, even though we don't know how future will play out. So of course we know we're going to have some substitution and displacement. We're going to have some new job creation. We're going to have a lot of jobs that get augmented, amplified, transformed. I suspect the issue is not going to be the number of jobs, despite the obsession with that. Not so much from my own opinion, but sort of reading the work of others who study this professionally and sort of have the right data and tools. It's going to be the income distribution. The world's not short of worker problems. In 11 of the 12 largest economies, the demographics are such that they're short of labor. So it's a question of managing the distribution and creating the opportunities. The good stuff and the bad stuff and everything in the middle is all going to happen, but it's which way do we tilt? And it's constantly reminding people that it's not predetermined. It depends on government policies and incentives, local institutions. It depends on the choices any business team does down on the ground. Do we limit ourselves to thinking only of automating what people are currently doing today and we stop there? That's sort of the worst of all cases. If we automate, we displace the job and we sort of don't do the extra work to get the productivity benefits or the innovation benefits, sort of all the bad things people worry about will happen. And it's sort of the lazy approach. It takes less effort to go that way. So we have to mobilize the energy. I don't think we have the choice of whether we use this technology or not. That's happening. But given that we're doing it, how do we sort of curate the productivity trajectory and effect and the innovation effect so that we're creating opportunity and stability, as opposed to, the world of a few very well-off people and the rest of it lives like Mad Max.
Very good. Any final words, Tom?
No, I'm all in favor of that. And maybe we should mention, I think I have observed Steve getting more and more interested in this MIT project on the task force on the work of the future as this book went along, and some of the things that he says are explored, I think, nicely in that book. One of the endorsers of our book, the economist David Autor, was one of the leaders of that project and has given a lot of thought to the issue as well. So In addition to needing people inside organizations to think about this very carefully, we also need our public leaders to play that role. And we haven't seen that much of that happening yet either.
Very good. That was fascinating. So many challenges. I really enjoyed reading your book, and I even enjoyed this conversation even more. So I highly recommend Working with AI, Real Stories of Human-Machine Collaboration to anyone who wants to explore this in a bit more detail. If you ever want to re-listen to this conversation, head to my YouTube channel or my podcast, where you can find hundreds of other conversations about the future of technology and business. Thank you so much for your time today, Tom and Stephen.
Our pleasure. Thank you.